Hi, everyone. You're all very welcome. My name is Alice Butler, and I am the co-director of aemi, an Arts Council funded organisation that supports and regularly exhibits programs of artists and experimental film. We are so thrilled to be here tonight to present this evening's panel discussion around the run of Lisa Rovner's really compelling Sisters with Transistors, a film that we have been really delighted to partner with Dublin Feminist Film Festival and the Irish Film Institute to show online from IFI at home for the last number of days. I know a lot of you will have just come from the watch along, so you're very welcome. But also anyone who's just watched it over the last few days as well. It's great to have you. So as any of you who've seen the film, Sisters with Transistors traces a history of radical practice by shedding light on just some of the long list of truly extraordinary women who've innovated new forms of electronic music and played a really crucial role in its development, but have nevertheless been omitted from or totally underwritten in dominant histories of the art form. So to counter that momentum and to coincide with International Women's Day, we have invited tonight's panel, made up of women who all work in the Irish electronic music scene, to discuss Sisters with Transistors and to consider how the women portrayed in the film have informed, influenced, and inspired subsequent work in this field, this ever-evolving field. So we're really beyond excited to hear from tonight's speakers, Linda Buckley, Celaviedmai, Michelle Doyle and Syn, and would like to really truly extend a huge thanks to all of them for being here to respond to the film with us this evening. We really appreciate it. It's really exciting to hear your perspectives on the film. Tonight's panel is going to be moderated by Kate Butler, who's also been a really enormous help in every aspect of planning tonight's event too, alongside with everything else. So a really special thank you goes to her for all her time and work on it with us. And Kate has been DJing and writing about Dublin's electronic music scene since the late 90s. In 2017, she started a monthly show on Dublin Digital Radio, digging into the rave era records that got her hooked in the first place: techno, jungle, drum and bass, UK hardcore, and finding a new groove in the disorientating futurism of footwork. Kate also produces Atomic on DDR, which gives young people an opportunity to host their own show. In 2018, 2019, she played at Rabble, Open Ear, Backstory, Out, and with the Gash Collective, while her recent publications include a history essay on D1 recordings and an article mix about Dublin nightclub The Funnel. She collaborated with author-architect Owen O'Doherty and the Irish Architecture Foundation to highlight inventions and pioneering electronic music by women. And she also scheduled a series of talks about community and music at the Comfort Carnival at the 2019 Fringe Festival. Kate is currently researching a book on why there are so few female pop producers. We're really excited and looking forward to seeing that. So once again, a huge thanks to everyone for taking part this evening and for everyone who's joining us for the discussion. Also a thanks to the Arts Council who support both ourselves and the IFI. And just a quick run through that we'll be kind of handing over to Kate shortly, and then taking questions at around kind of 9:05, or at least you can put some questions into the chat box at any point during the conversation from here on out, and then we'll sort of be taking a look at them and Kate will be addressing them to the panel at around 9 or 5:05. And then Aoife from the Dublin Feminist Film Festival will be kind of giving us some kind of closing comments or concluding remarks at around 10 past, and we'll be aiming to kind of wrap up at the hour mark. But Daniel, did you want to add anything before we hand over to Kate?
Not much really, other than to say, just to reiterate those thanks to especially all our panelists, but also to just kind of quickly talk about how we came to screen the film. We first came across some talk in relation to the film on Twitter through some shared friends, and quickly recognized that it's something that united not only our interests, a lot of our interests within aemi, but also some interests within Dublin Feminist Film Festival. So we were delighted to reach out to them and be able to like come up with this concept. It seemed like a really good opportunity then to look at this documentary, but also look at this documentary in the context of what was going on here and the scene here, and try to connect those legacies with some sort of current practice. It seemed like a wasted opportunity not to do that. So we're delighted to be able to combine those things, and also to combine those things with something resembling a degree of liveness, which is, you know, kind of hard to bring about in these times a little bit. So it feels live, and it feels like it's kind of great to have that a bit of a momentum around the film. But I mean, I think our ultimate preference now would be to be following the Q&A with a DJ set by Kate, where we could, you know, sit around and listen to a lot of music. But in lieu of that, I think this is great. And just again, super excited, and thanks to everybody for taking part.
Okay. Thank you all so much for that lovely introduction. And I will also say thank yous, because that's what happens at Zoom events, lots of thank yous. Thank you to aemi and to the Feminist Film Festival and the IFI for giving us this platform. It's really, really nice to be able to talk about our world, the world of electronic music, and share it with people who are interested in creative forms across the board. So what I'd like to do is just really quickly introduce my panelists, because it'll give you an idea of the richness and variety of electronic music in Ireland at the moment. And then we're going to go straight into getting all of their feedback on the film, which I'm sure you all really enjoyed. So firstly, Linda Buckley is here with us. Linda, lovely to have you here. So Linda is one of our most accomplished composers and performers creating electronic music and acoustic music in Ireland today. Her work has been performed by the BBC Symphony Orchestra, the RTE National Symphony Orchestra, and the Crash Ensemble. Her most recent album is last year's Magisterial from Ocean's Floor. She's from Kinsale, and she went from growing up on a farm to studying music at UCC and then teaching composition at the hugely influential Masters in Music and Media Technologies at Trinity, introducing a whole generation of Irish electronic music makers to some of the women in the film that we just watched. In 2018, she became the first woman to teach composition at the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland. Yes, that is a real thing. We have first women doing things still. It's amazing. Michelle Doyle performs as Rising Damp. She's a visual artist and musician. And this time last year, Rising Damp released her debut album, Petrol Factory. It's an industrial synth opus. And she released it on Irish label Where the Time Goes. Originally from Wicklow, Michelle has a punk background. She played bass in the band Sissy, and while she was at NCAD, through a scholarship to Emily Carr College in Vancouver, that she began producing electronic music. Heroically, for International Women's Day 2019, she produced a sleep concert on Dublin Digital Radio, playing improvised electronic music for 8 hours throughout the night. Next up, we have Maimouna Salif, who performs a Celaviedmai. So Celaviedmai is a rapper and producer. She's open for artists like Lil Wayne and Mac Miller, and she's recently put out a series of fire singles, Confessions, Reckless, and Known Better, and they're making a big noise. She also featured on Cal and Pepper's Egyptian hit with video views of over 1 million, thank you very much, and appears in the newest season of the RTE My Tribe series that's just started on RTE. She's from Galway. She started making beats at 20 on FL Studio software, and now she's getting covered by the New York Times and the BBC. Great to have you, Mai. Next, we have Renee Griffin, who performs as Syn, one of the most aesthetically adventurous DJs operating internationally. She's from Cork, and she's now based in Glasgow, and Syn has a precocious background. She began producing on GarageBand software at age 12 and is now obviously tearing it up. She was a co-founder of the Flood label in Cork and also ran the Cunt Night in the Roundy throughout 2019. She is now working on her own. Last year, she released a landmark hard drum EP, Temper, on London label Even the Strong. For those missing the dance floor, check out her mix on DJ Mag. Highly recommended. So look, I'm going to start with Linda. Linda, would you mind talking us through your response to this incredible film by Lisa Rovner?
Well, the first thought I think really was finally, I've kind of waited for years to see a film like this, and when I think back to, I suppose, 20 years ago, when I started out in electronic music, none of these women were really talked about at all, and they're such important figures, and I'm so happy and excited to see a light being shone on them. They've been really kind of sidelined in history. And I suppose one of the first things that's talked about in it from Laurie Spiegel, she talks about like technology being a liberator. And I think that's such a beautiful way to open the film, because it kind of brings us right up to where we are today. I know we're going to kind of talk about all of that later in terms of kind of where we've come and how far we've come in the last kind of 30 or 40 years. I found it really inspiring. Such bravery, not only that they were working in such a male-dominated field, but also that they were battling with this notion that what they were doing wasn't considered to be music, and all the different kind of difficulties and challenges that they would have had to overcome to really kind of show their passion and kind of furrow their own paths in the way that they did. And Lisa Rovner, the director, talks about how this is a kind of a story of silence, and I think that's really important to bear in mind as well, that they were doing really important things, but it's only years later that a lot of this has kind of come to light in a way. I remember teaching a course in music and media technologies, as you were saying in your intro, and I started that I think in 2004. And at that time, of course, it was the very beginnings of the internet and all of that. So my research was mostly in paper and books, and most of the writing on the history of electronic music focused on like music concrete in Paris and the studio in Cologne with Stockhausen and the big institutions in academia in America, but very rarely were the women spoken about, almost just like footnotes really. And I remember thinking it was really important to talk about them at the time. So I remember talking about Pauline Oliveris and Clara Rockmore and Wendy Carlos, and I just think it was really important to kind of show that there's such a diversity there, and the kinds of things that they were doing were incredibly ahead of their time, incredibly innovative. And I'm just so happy to see this, come to light. I mean, there's a brilliant reference in it to Marianne Ameche, where they say she didn't want to push around dead white men's notes. And it really reminds me of a musicologist, Bob Gilmore, and he talks about a lot of music colleges and how their emphasis is on the work of dead white European males. And I remember thinking that years ago, like, why are we focusing on this when there's so much amazing stuff out there, So I was just really so happy to see that.
Thanks so much, Linda. That's great to hear. Mai, how would you like to tell us how you felt about the film?
Hi, I'm Mai. But the film was amazing. I really liked it so much. It kind of gave me like a newfound inspiration somewhat, because I didn't actually know there were so many women like in music like that, because again, we never get like the light shine on us. So it was very interesting to see. I think with the person that really gave me so much motivation and just like new inspiration in the movie was Daphne, because I kind of relate with her, like well, I went to college, I finished college, but like, kind of turning down the regular like 9 to 5 or like a career for like music, and everyone kind of looking at you like, what are you doing? Things like that kind of encouraged me, and it kind of reminds me that, look, if they did it during a time where women were kind of like overlooked and didn't have like the same rights that we do have now, then anything is possible. Like, what am I waiting for? Like, it just kind of is like a we run the world type of movie, like, women can do it. And I really, really, really enjoyed that about the movie. I love that so much. So yeah, that's what I thought about the movie. It was great.
Oh, that's so inspiring to hear. That's that you've been inspired to keep going with what you're doing. Michelle, how did you feel about it?
There was a lot of things that came up for me when I was watching this, but I guess like one of the main things was just that how this technology allowed people to become the composer and performer, the programmer, and that it was completely DIY. And I think that was really important, that it was the space where you could go in and you could be creative and you weren't kind of having things explained to you or things been, you know, kind of mystified on purpose in front of you, which is a big thing I find with like gear and with like making music, using digital audio workstations. There's often like a certain like it's magic. It does, you know, there's maybe a bit of gatekeeping that goes on with it as well. And like just that like it was so important for them to have their own space to be able to do this. So just yeah, that people were going in and they were becoming everything. They were completely DIY. Another thing as well that I really liked was the breaking through the silence. It just like again and again throughout the film, I know this is like an editing thing, but I thought it was quite funny how men are drowned out throughout the film. And you know, just when Suzanne Chani, she's on the talk show, she's absolutely blasting them out of it. When Thurston Moore is at Marianne, I'm going to say her name wrong, Amarche. Yeah, when he was at her house, and she again, you know, she's just so loud, and he has his hands over his ears, and I just love that about the film. It's just like, turn it up, you know, keep going higher and higher, don't turn our levels down, you know.
I love that as well. It's so much fun. And I loved how Suzanne Ciani just looks really happy in every single clip. She's just delighted with herself, whatever she's doing. It's very inspiring. Renee, how did you feel about the film?
I really liked it. I thought it was really nice seeing like everyone's, you could see all the artists were really passionate about what they were doing. And it was kind of, yeah, it was just inspiring to see people have that opportunity to express something that was obviously like very much inside them, like the way they're talking about listening to stuff. So I thought it was really inspiring to me.
I think that's something that came across really strongly, isn't it? This idea of something that's inside them, but also how much all of the women focused on what they were hearing. They were really focused on listening as well, like to what the sound was, right? Linda, you've had a lot of experience actually working with synthesizers. Could you talk to us about, you know, what the women were talking about in terms of those machines being quite sensuous, about like feeling almost a kind of a human connection to those machines?
That's one thing I loved about the film, actually, that thread running throughout the whole thing. And it's like, there was a beautiful thing where you could kind of trace this line throughout the whole film in the kind of language that they used to talk about these machines, in a way, in this very beautiful, human, poetic, emotional kind of way, you know. Like these kind of phrases crop up, like the beauty of the circuits, the feeling and the sound, it had its own voice. And that's definitely how I feel about, you know, working with any kind of analog synthesizer gear. I was very lucky a few years ago to be composer in residence at the Moog Sound Lab, and just that physicality of your, you know, dealing with these patch chords. It's tactile, there's oscillators, you go in the morning, you don't know what's going to happen, you're tuning oscillators, you're tuning sine tones, and it's like so much can just happen in the room, and you're just so kind of actively listening, and you're responding all the time, and you're, you know, creating sequences, you're creating patterns, and then you're responding back to that again. And as Michelle was saying earlier, like that idea about being composer performer, you're not sitting at home making a score that you then hand to an orchestra, and you don't, you know what I mean? Like it's all about you kind of in that moment, in a way. And I think there's such a beauty to that. And you know, that's something that really comes across a lot in the way they talk about the physicality of the sound and kind of sound perception. And in a way, like I remember years ago thinking about the way that maybe Stockhausen or Schaefer would talk about how they constructed their music, and it did sound quite technical, and it maybe to some people might sound a little bit cold or clinical, and sometimes I remember talking about electronic music with other maybe people who were more in the acoustic music world, and there's that perception of it being kind of cold and clinical or mathematical, but it actually is the opposite to me, you know. And the way that they talked about it, it was like, yes, you know, that's exactly how I feel about it, you know. Suzanne, actually Laurie Spiegel, I think, talks about how she met Martin Subotnick and would have worked on the Buchla synthesizer, and she said that it was like something going from black and white into color, And that is like such a beautiful way of putting it, because that's kind of how it was for me as well when I first heard electronic music. It was like suddenly the whole kind of world opened up in a way. And there's such kind of beauty and poetry and all of that, and something that sometimes I think doesn't get talked about in electronic music, actually.
There's a distinction to be made though as well, isn't there, between working with, as you say, analog synthesizers and software, really. Syn, Renee, you produce as Syn mostly with software, am I correct?
Yeah, and entirely with software. Completely.
And so could you relate to what they were talking about, or is it a completely different feeling?
Well, I don't know. I think I definitely relate because I don't know. A computer is basically just another type of hardware. I don't have like much experience using other equipment. I guess I've played some instruments in college and stuff, but I've always felt like I was able to express more from a computer, and it always felt like a very organic process for me. So it was just kind of, I guess, whatever works for you and whatever accessible as well, is that was kind of like a determining factor in why I use software, because I'd love to get some hardware, but it's expensive, so probably won't be
Well,
able to.
I mean, that's a really big factor in how much this has exploded, because software makes it accessible, right? Much more accessible than analog synthesizers. So it's a positive.
Yeah, completely. Definitely. It's great, like that I was able to start from such a young age, just because it's like became a more popular thing. I'm sure like if it was just exclusive to hardware, no one would have that opportunity right now.
Yeah. You were similar. You downloaded software onto your computer, I think, when you were 20. Can you tell me what that meant to you, to be able to do that, to be able to access something that allowed you to create beats?
I think for me, when I turned 20, I think that was the best thing ever for me, because I was looking for other ways to express myself where words couldn't say anything, So like downloading, I think it was FL Studio at the time, or Fruity Loops, I can't remember. I downloaded that at the time, and it just gave me this feeling of like, I don't know what it is, but something, and it makes you feel very good, because at the time as well, I was in college. It was just so hectic. I felt like I had no control over anything in my life, but music was that outlet for me, where I was able to control something, or like kind of transfer emotions per se into something, from something negative into positive, which is great. And I know we couldn't physically touch it, but then it kind of makes me think of Clara Rockman, where she didn't actually physically touch an instrument. She played with air, and she said you can't play air with hammers. Oh, how did she say it? You cannot play air with hammers. You have to play it with butterflies or something like that. I know she said that, yeah. But it kind of reminds me of like software. You can't actually, physically touch it or whatever, but it's like butterflies. It's just a soft little touch, but it kind of creates something beautiful, and it's sensual and just so enjoyable. So that's it for me, really.
That's so interesting that you need a delicate touch for using software. Yeah, it's true. One of the things that struck me about the film, and Michelle, maybe you might be able to talk a little bit about this. The film, by its nature, because it compiles all of these women together, it does kind of two things. It does contextualize them in that, in the context of women working in that field. It is really nice to see them all together, and it's quite powerful to see that amount of women making music together. But at the same time, it does takes them out of context, takes them out of their context and whatever they were working. Like one of the examples I'd give you is Suzanne Ciani in the 1970s. She said she was trying to get a record deal, and she went around to all the labels and she couldn't get one. And I think what the film doesn't tell you is that at that time there were loads of instrumental synthesizer albums. So you have like Tangerine Dream, you have Jean-Michel Jarre, who have these huge hits with instrumental synthesizer albums, and yet she can't get a record company to see that she can do the same thing. And what they're saying to her is that they want her to sing instead. And I feel that that was a very gendered rejection, you know. Michelle, what do you think about that idea of context, and in particular with the way that the film put all of the women together?
So I think, like, in terms of like the trajectory of the film, I quite liked that it seemed like there was a woman at every single point of history, if you get me. That, like, you know, here at the start, I mean, the theremin, that, like, you know, Clara Rockmore had already started using it, and that, you know, throughout history there seemed to be this, there was a woman at that point using this instrument and using it in a very like creative and inventive way. So, like, in terms of like it kind of like referencing what was happening throughout music, I just felt like it was kind of complete, you know what I mean? Like, as in, like, I was quite like, I was, you know, I was quite shocked going into it, because I guess my points of reference had always just been like watching 3-minute clips on YouTube, that there was a thread that goes throughout all of these, and that there was kind of like, yeah, this very coherent history being written about. But yeah, like with regards to the voice, sorry, I have a separate point to that completely. Yeah, often I feel like sometimes when you're working in certain like environments, that like if you are a woman, you might be asked to use your voice, and as opposed to using gear, or as opposed to using your guitar or using whatever instrument you play, that sometimes you're just given a microphone and you're told to go for it. And you know, it can be quite like frustrating to make people see that you're like a musician as well, you're a producer, you do all these other things, you know, you're not simply just using a microphone. And that's not to say that, you know, this isn't the same thing, they are all the same thing, but like we can do everything, you know. And it can be just kind of frustrating that like it may not be seen that way, and that, like, you know, sometimes these situations bring up things like that, and you really have to like one of the biggest things I think you have to like learn as a musician is to really stand your ground, and to say exactly what you want from a situation and what you want from other people who you work with.
Yeah, I think there is a big societal push for women to perform vocally as opposed to instrumentally. I think that is really obvious in pop music today. I don't know if anyone has seen the Billie Eilish documentary and the Taylor Swift documentaries, which are both great. I really enjoyed them. But visually, it's really interesting to me that in all of the scenes in the studios, it's a girl on a mic and it's a guy on a laptop or a mixing desk, you know, and it's that kind of binary is really potent and really strong still. It's a really strong messaging, I think, for our young girls to be receiving. For you as a vocalist, like, you're a rapper, which is like an unusual thing in that rapping is male dominated, and then you're also producing beats. Can you talk us through, do you feel you're perceived differently in those two spheres, if you like?
Yeah, because like I feel like when it comes to rap and producing actually music in general, I feel like it's very male dominated. And when you're good at what you do, no offense, but I feel like men kind of get a little bit intimidated, because it's like, oh, how come you can do this? How come you can do what I'm doing? And it kind of, I know, intimidates some people, but yeah, I think when it comes to producing, like when I started, I did it under like an anonymous name. I never let anyone know what gender it was or anything, because I just wanted to be taken serious. Because I know when I started producing, I was also a rapper, and I knew the effect it had on me being a female rapper, and everyone kind of like overlooking me and just underestimating me, and I just didn't like the feeling. So I was like, okay, I'm going to take the power into my hands, and I'm just going to go anonymous and not let anyone know what gender I am, and you're just going to listen to my music and appreciate it for what it is, rather than looking at it from a gender perspective, if that makes sense. But yeah, that also I was going to add to a point, it's kind of like a different point, but in terms of the movie, I love the movie completely, but I wish also there was like a representation of like also Black women, because I didn't see that. I don't know if they just didn't do a lot of research into it, or they didn't have any, but it's just something to see as well, because I do feel like that does matter when it comes to music. Women being represented is absolutely fantastic. I'm so happy I got to see it, because I didn't see it before, but I would have also loved to see if there was any women of color or Black women in general that were doing that type of music, because it is very important for the younger generation to see that anyone could do this. And, you know, it doesn't matter what color you are, it doesn't matter how old you are, if you're a woman, like, it's possible for you to do. So I was going to add that point as well.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because it's definitely one of the things I wanted to talk about, is an idiom of music which is quite one note. Renee actually said this to me the other day. She's kind of it's an avant-garde, and it's very Eurocentric as well, and US centric. So we have, and all of the women are white. So, you know, there is a kind of I think a very narrow idea of what electronic music is in the film, in a sense. And one of the things I looked up, and she was a songwriter and a producer. So, I mean, that meant she was working in the recording studios in Motown. And I found a photo of her, and it wasn't easy, but I found a photo of her in a studio. I am going to share it right now, if I can. And okay, hopefully you can see it. Can you see it? Yeah. So, I mean, she's just beautiful, first of all. And there she is, sitting at what looks like a mixing desk, working at a mixing desk in a studio. It was really hard to find any information about her production work. So her, you know, any of the interviews that I could find were all spoke about her songwriting ability, which was phenomenal. She wrote songs with Stevie Wonder, and so she was really successful at that. So there's very little that I could find about what she actually did in the studio. But I think really a film like this, and the director said it herself, it's not a definitive history. So I think we should be looking at it as a launch pad for us to start looking at other histories. And I think like this is a perfect place to start. You know, there has to be more information about what somebody like Celaviedmai did in the studio, using electronics to make music. What do you think, Mai?
Definitely, I do agree. I think it is a great stepping stone to get into like the bigger picture of everything, and just like our history in the past, and how women of all different backgrounds have influenced music overall, you know, and have generated such a unique and special sound. So I'm excited to see what this movie has opened, and what, you know, the motivation and inspiration it's given to all of us women. It's very exciting.
Yeah. Does anybody else have anything to say on that?
Well, just to also say kind of, I suppose, that notion of like privilege, you know, does kind of become part of that story a little bit in terms of the history of electronic music, like that having access to this equipment would have been very difficult. So it would have been in the big universities in the States and in the big, you know, studios in Europe. So it was difficult for a lot of individuals to actually make their own music unless they were able to have just some tape machines in their house or something. But I suppose it's interesting then to think about those who kind of brought this music to a wider audience and out of academia as well, like even bands at the time, like Silver Apples, who were playing oscillators live, and Kate Bush was one of the first artists to use the Fairlight synthesizer, in the early 80s and things. So in a way, it was kind of lovely to see that music being taken out of the academic institutions and into gigs and the immediacy and of rock music and things like that. So the kind, it goes in a different direction then, I think, and becomes more wider reaching in a way.
Thanks, Linda. I totally agree with all of that. I think there's a real aspect of privilege in all of this. Like, if you look at most of those artists, they were working or they had gone to third level universities. I think Suzanne Ciani picked up her Bucla in Berkeley, so yeah, definitely that's a big part of the story. Sorry, I actually just turned off my video because I think I was buffering, so hopefully you can all hear me now. Okay. Syn, Renee, I keep calling you Syn, Renee, because I just associate you as Syn. I've seen you DJ so many times. Renee, one of the things that really strikes me, though, is that now production today is, hip hop and pop and dance music production is almost pretty much the same thing. Would you agree, or how would you see that?
I'd say definitely, like, right now, there's so much like crossover and everything, especially with, like, I find kind of hyper pop is like a major merging point of so many different sounds at the moment, and people are like much more willing to not just get limited to one genre or one traditional like understanding of music. So I'd say it's definitely a time where stuff is really crossing over and cross-pollinating a lot. Even within like just like dance music, you see people bringing in like all kinds of interesting factors, and not only do you see people like bringing stuff in, but they're also getting recognized for doing that, which I feel maybe music journalism hasn't always been very very experimental or very forward thinking with what it's involving, but yeah, there's so much going on now.
And do you think that's partly to do with the fact that the technology that everybody is using is pretty much the same?
Yeah, definitely, and especially like just you could literally download FL Studio, never have made a song before, and then like put it online, and it could go completely viral in like 24 hours, which wasn't really like pre-internet. Obviously, you wouldn't be able to get anything out nearly as fast, but because like there's so many possible voices now, and like people getting inspired off stuff they have like complete creative control over, because they're just uploading on their own platforms, it's definitely, I think, just like spurred on people's like imagination and experimentation.
Yeah. I think one of the other things I wanted to talk about actually was in terms of representation was Wendy Carlos in the film. She was one of the artists featured, but when they spoke about her, they only spoke about her Switched on Bach release, which Suzanne Ciani critiqued. And I thought the criticism was totally fair, and it was really interesting dialogue to have about that particular release. But I was a bit disappointed that that was all that they spoke about in terms of Wendy Carlos. Renee, do you have any views on that?
Yeah, it was definitely a very like limited look at her work in general, because like she did the soundtrack for Tron and for what's it called, Clockwork Orange and stuff, and I felt like, like there's so much you could talk about there, to just have that one section.
Yeah. And Linda, to go back to you, how did you feel about the style of the film in terms of how it relied on the women's voices in telling the story, and as a consequence didn't really have too much expertise or talking head kind of dialogue in it. How did you feel that, you know, was that important to you to hear their voices?
Absolutely, it was. You know, I kind of feel because they've been so marginalized for so long, I think I really needed to hear them speak themselves about it. You know, I mean, I think in that situation, there's no point in having some other academic come on and speak about it. I think, you know, hearing them describe their own kind of passion for what they do and how it has brought them such kind of joy and discovery through their whole lives was really moving to me, actually. And I think that wouldn't have come across in the same way if you have that kind of filter of external viewpoint. In a way, I think there was something really beautiful about it coming from themselves, and I love that about the film, actually.
Yeah, I loved some of the stories, like Pauline talking about her mother giving her the tape deck. You know, it was such I don't know, Michelle, if you have any comment on that, but it felt like, you know, she was giving her daughter agency with by giving her the tape deck.
Yeah,
Michelle,
sorry,
can you hear?
you kind of broke up there, but I actually had a comment here that was sort of not related to that, but just related to what Renee was saying about just producing and being able to produce at home. And one of the things, I guess, that I was just sort of thinking of, just like in recent days, SoundCloud have changed how they give people royalties, or like that they intend on giving people directly royalties. And I guess like one of the things I was thinking about was just like in light of it being International Women's Day, was just labor and how much we get paid for making the music that we make. And like how a lot of these platforms, I suppose, like streaming and like, you know, it's very hard to build a career as a woman online, like, and, you know, from making music in your bedroom, it's very difficult, you know. And like, I mean, it's really hard to kind of like have any kind of trajectory with stuff if, you know, you're kind of just sort of, you're, you know, you could be reaching a lot of people, but you're completely flatlining in terms of like how you can bring people in. And like, you kind of feel forced to have to work in the infrastructure of SoundCloud and the infrastructure of Spotify, and artists lose, you know. So yeah, it was just something that, like, I don't know, I was thinking about this week a lot as well, because say even with SoundCloud, it's so nice for what Renee was talking about, like this kind of like platform where you're creating quickly and you're able to put things out there and get people to respond to them. And, you know, SoundCloud is such an important part of a conversation with music that you have with people who listen to your music. And it could be so good, but instead it's just, you know, it's completely like you have to spend about €9 to even put over 180 minutes of work onto it. So yeah, it's really disappointing. And like you kind of feel like you're unsupported then, like, you know, throughout like all these different technological advances. It's like, how do you make your career work?
Like that's just an unbelievable dilemma. And I mean, I don't even know how I can make this broadcast work out of my bedroom. My children keep running up to tell me that I'm buffering, so apologies everyone, by the way. But yeah, it's a huge problem. And yeah, it's almost like the technology is now being exploited against artists as opposed to facilitating artists. Isn't that it?
Yeah, and it's just very hard to kind of like to have this kind of empowerment, you know, to fully own your music, and to, you know, once you start working with these platforms, it's like you lose the ownership of it.
Yeah, it's how do you find doing that? Because I mean, you would rely a lot on YouTube, I guess, as well, as a platform. How do you find that?
Yeah, I agree. I feel like we are somewhat losing the ownership of our music, and we are kind of, how will I say, yeah, we are losing the ownership of our music, like kind of as well as financially we kind of are losing out as well, because I know they take a big percentage, whereas like I know, well, I don't want to say I know, but like back in the days, you know, you used to go and buy CDs and, you know, like tapes and things like that, and some artists would be like independent, so you're like putting in your own money and you're getting it back as well, and all the hours spent and things like that. So yeah, I do agree, we are somewhat losing ownership of our music, and technology is kind of working against us, but hopefully something happens and it changes, but it's looking like that's what it's going to be like from now on, unfortunately.
We have a question from the audience, and actually it's kind of reminded me to go back to Linda when we were speaking there about Wendy Carlos. Linda, I know you had a counterpoint in relation to Chiani's critique of Switched on Bach. Would you mind talking about that?
Well, exactly. Like, I kind of feel that you see these things happen throughout the course of the history of electronic music, this kind of, you know, wanting to embrace something in its full new form. So even like with the theremin, like when Clara Rockmore was playing these romantic, quite classical melodies, some would have criticized that as being backward looking and not forward looking. So they're saying this is a new instrument, why not embrace what it can do and all the capabilities of the new sound it has and everything, rather than playing like Rachmaninoff or something on it, you know. But even though she was, you know, a beautiful player, obviously, and, you know, classically trained violinist and things. And equally, you know, there was that critique of the Switched on Bach, saying that it was kind of populist and like, why would you play Baroque music on these synthesizers? But I kind of feel in a way like it brought that music out to such a wide world and the wider community. And I really think, you know, what is the harm in that in a way? Like, if that was an entry point for a lot of listeners into the world of other electronic music, then I'm all for that, you know. So I kind of feel that's not really that much of a fair criticism to say that it was almost too populist or kind of too backward looking or something. I think it's, you know, one of the first records I remember hearing when I was a very small child was electronic music, orchestral music played on synthesizers. And my sister Irene, who's also a great electronic musician, would have loved that as well. We were both very young when we heard that. And, you know, years later kind of hearing the instrumental versions and preferring the synthesizers and things. So, you know, those things had huge impact on me, and I would never be snobbish about them. You know, I think they're really important, and I think, you know, there's nothing wrong with more people hearing it and discovering the music through that.
I think there's room for all of it, isn't there? You know, I mean, I can understand Chiani's critique in terms of, I think maybe perhaps the size of the success of Switched on Bach, it might have kind of seemed to have sort of drowned out all other forms of experimental electronic music at that time. But one of the questions from the audience was, like, who was your first inspiration to start getting hands-on with, and I assume with electronics, with electronic music? Linda, can I start with you? Can you remember what inspired you, or who inspired you?
Well, I think it was very lucky that I was the youngest of 9 children growing up in this very remote place in the Old Sale, that my older siblings had really good taste in music, so they were bringing really good records into the house all the time, like Cocteau Twins and things. So I remember kind of hearing that music and thinking it was really beautiful and otherworldly, and then later kind of Kate Bush. And so I was always really interested in it, and as well kind of living where we're from, you know, it was very kind of strange sonic environment of foghorns and things like that. So that was very inspiring to me, just hearing sounds in the environment and kind of feeling that they were very musical and things. But then I suppose years later, when I was about 18, I took a course in Ennis, of all places, in electronic music, in composition for 2 weeks, and learned kind of C sound, which is this kind of C programming language of sound synthesis, and kind of got in it through there. So kind of a little bit of deep programming, but then kind of came out the other side of that and into, you know, recording and things. So pretty young when I got into it, really, and never looked back since, really.
So interesting that you mentioned the foghorns, because that reminds me then of Delia Derbyshire's experience with the sirens, which is just so apocalyptic for us now to think about it. And it's so evocative, isn't it, that idea of being a child and hearing those abstract sounds, as she was saying, just coming out of nowhere, but they were abstract sounds with meaning. And of course the foghorns would have been the same. There was a meaning attached to them. I love that. Who inspired you to download Fruity Loops?
He's actually not an electronic producer or anything, but the person that inspired me was Jay Dilla. He's I don't know if you guys know who he is, but he's like a hip hop producer.
Yeah.
He's dead now, but he really inspired me. So that was the first time I was like, let me try it. But at the same time, like when I was younger, me and my sister listened to a lot of like house music and like electronic music. Like I'm not even gonna lie to you, like Scooter, I don't know if you guys know who Scooter is, Tiesto, that was us, so which is very different from what I do now, because I know I rap and that's what I do, but that's my vibe. So I'm trying to incorporate that with the music that I'm making now, so hopefully you guys will hear something like that very soon.
Oh, I can't wait. A bit of Scooter and rap. That sounds great.
Yeah.
I bring it on, definitely. Renee, what about you?
I started producing when I was 12 because my mom had just gotten a Mac and she had GarageBand on it. So I'd always been like super into music. And somewhere in my family, I think like most of the electronic music I've been exposed to is through my dad, because he had like a massive CD collection. So I used to just stick on CDs, and for a while I think I was listening to about 6 a day, every day, 6 like new albums just to absorb music. So I was just like I just really loved it. I couldn't name like a specific artist. I just really enjoyed. You were
eating it all up.
Yeah, I just wanted like to hear everything. Like I just want to listen.
Amazing. And Michelle, what about you?
I just want to speak to what Renee said there as well. Like I feel like one of the biggest things for me in terms of music was in Wicklow Town, we had a pirate radio station called Storm FM. And we had a disco and everything attached to it. And like going to the disco and listening to the tunes, it was so amazing. It was such an amazing subculture. It was guards versus children in my town. And, the disco was like our real freedom. And I actually had, I don't know if anyone has ever heard of this, but I got a CD-ROM from Quinnsworth or Tesco, and it was a hip hop EJ, and it was like a digital audio workstation that was like, £2 or whatever. And it was great. You could actually make full-on tunes in it, and it came with loads of samples. But I think like the number one for me, like when I was, over the years when I was kind of going from listening to punk to more electronic music, it was The Knife. The Knife was like the number one band for me. Like I just absolutely loved them, and I still love them. I still love like the new things they do. They still are full of surprises.
Brilliant. Thanks, Michelle. We have another question in saying that it's great to see Cork represented. Big up Cork. And it's interesting as well to me. I was thinking this earlier. None of us here are from Dublin originally. I think our the rural side of electronic music in Ireland is often overlooked, but it's always been very strong for me in terms of an influence. Going to the local country disco was a big deal, big deal when you're from the country. But Linda, could I just ask you, what do you think? The question from the viewer is that they felt Cork has always had an affinity for new and experimental music. Linda, what would you think about that? And then Renee, maybe you could discuss it.
I mean, so many different strands to it when I think about it. I mean, years ago, of course, Sir Henry's, which is so sad that that's not there anymore, it was such a huge influence on so many people. I suppose it was just such a huge part of the culture. When I was in college, I was there, I suppose, in the late 90s. And then there's kind of that other experimental thread as well, which would have been people in the guest house and making kind of sound art. And I went to UCC, where I suppose there was such a kind of diversity of the music that was taught. So it was like music from Indonesia and medieval music and Irish traditional sean-nós and all these things. So like navigating all those threads together, I think has always been a really interesting part of the culture there, and the way that it's taught as well at UCC, I think, was very interesting in that you were never told you had to go down this very classical route. You could go in and play some gamelan and sit on the floor, and then you could go and make an electronic piece, and then you could do something else. So it was kind of like very broad and diverse. So I think that was really important.
Renee, how do you feel about the Rebel County and Cork City having an affinity for new and experimental music?
I definitely think, yeah, there's like a lot of people doing very interesting things in Cork. And I guess it kind of depends. I feel there could be like more venues in Cork to support people who are doing interesting stuff. Like it's really great to have the Roundy, and I'm not sure if the Kino's still open since I've moved. I'm not really sure, but they were pretty putting on some interesting stuff too. But I feel Cork's also like a very hard place to be doing something quite out of the box. I felt people locally were a lot more interested in like maybe what I was doing after getting a bit of recognition outside of where I was. But I know that's like very classic story, happens with a lot of people. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of like people doing very interesting things in Cork and pushing boundaries forward.
I always remember somebody telling me down in Cork years ago that the port down there used to the harbour in Cork City, or the port there, that a lot of records from the US were imported there for some reason. So apparently black music from the US had a big stronghold then in Cork City, while Dublin was more attuned to what was going on in the UK. I don't know if that's the case, but yeah, that's perhaps something that kind of influenced that outcome in Cork. Another question is if anybody could recommend female pioneers to listen to, any other female pioneers other than those featured in the film.
Well, definitely some more recent people that I love would be like Caterina Barbieri, who's doing amazing work at the moment with synthesizers, and kind of the way she talks about it is brilliant as well. It's just about kind of energy and motion and all of this. There's Sarah Devacci, who maybe makes kind of more sustained sort of ambient music, really beautiful. Pamelia Kirsten is a brilliant theremin player. So there's loads of really interesting people at the moment. I'm sure the others have plenty to add to that as well.
Anyone else got any tips, any hot tips?
Holly Herndon, she was interviewed in it as well.
Yeah, she's fantastic. My own tip would be Zara Jones, who has a new album on her own label, Fractal Fantasy. I've been listening to that obsessively. Yeah. So, anyone else got any tips?
I really like Macy Rodman at the moment. Been listening to her a lot. Really cool.
Great. Is she on a particular label?
I'm not sure actually. She has like a few singles out. I think they've mostly come out from lockdown. It was like really cool lockdown themed music videos. I'm not really sure where she's signed to.
Okay.
But she's cool. Check her out.
Yeah, for sure. Any tips from the drill and hip hop world?
There's so many. Listen to me. No joke.
Yeah.
Goodness.
Are there many women producing in drill and hip hop?
Oh my gosh, I know a few. Yeah, they're coming up now. They're like a bit younger than me. There's CC Beats. She's from the UK. She's really, really, really good. Who else can I think of? Can't think of the top of my head, but I know I follow a few on Instagram that have just kind of started. So it's great to see. I think a lot of people have come out of their shell since quarantine or lockdown, and just like hidden talents are just flourishing and blossoming. So yeah, CC Beats, check her out. She's from London. She's really, really good.
Great, thanks. Yeah, look, we might try and compile a list and pop them into the social media afterwards. Look, I'm going to wrap up, and thank you all so much for such amazing contributions and great conversation. Really, really nice to be able to talk about that amazing film that was so emotional, and lovely to chat to you all. And I'm going to hand over to Aoife now from Dublin Film Festival.
Thank you, Kate. Wow, I'm surrounded by a stellar lineup of women here. I'm imagining going to a music festival where you're all headlining, and I'd love a good old dance. So my living room will have to do for now. So on behalf of Amy and ourselves here, I just really want to thank all our panelists tonight. Linda, Michelle, Renee, thank you so much for taking part in it. And Kate, you've been an amazing moderator, fair play to you. I'd just like to remind everyone as well that you can listen to an interview with Sisters with Transistors director Lisa Rovner on the IFI podcast, and that's available online now. And I'd like to leave you all with a quote from Lisa herself. I want people to keep digging up this history. This is just the beginning of a long process of rediscovery and retelling. So I think that touches on what you were discussing earlier during the chat there. And here's to women in music and women in film. Thanks, everybody.